Okay, I'm calling the February 9th meeting number 16 of the Street Funding Task Force to order. We have an agenda in front of us. Does anyone have, well, we don't need to add to the agenda verbally. We can just do it at the time. Does anyone have any changes? Did we have minutes?
I sent those out, I believe, last time.
Okay, I probably already read them. Does anyone have changes to minutes? Motion to approve? Thank you. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed?
Aye.
Approved? I have no comments, so we're going to go straight to Chad.
So thanks for all the comments so far in the report. I'm doing my best to balance everybody's different comments. Very few have conflicted, so it's been pretty good so far. We have 13 items that I need to run through, and Kathy noted some in a recent email, and then Ralph had some. And Chip had some, so everybody had some comments on the list here and see what people think. So the first one is that transition period. That was up towards the top of the report, that the group agreed to have a transition period greater than 4 years. So Kathy, did you want to, that was in the task force understandings, and it read number 4, to use a transition period greater than 4 years as the impact would be even greater, faster, and less acceptable to residents if a shorter transition period was used.
Well, I agree with that, shorter. I don't recall us focused so much on 4 years. And I guess the point I was trying to make in my email is I think it's more significant to talk about why we went to 15 on, 2 of the 3 options that we did. And I just didn't recall the 4 being that important to the whole discussion.
I think I agree with Kathy. If I remember, the 15-year conversation was that currently that is the period that people are paying assessments. If they've been assessed, it's 15 years, and that's kind of how we hit on 15 years.
So reword it to say a shorter transition period would have these concerns.
Yep.
Or do you want to say greater than?
You say why we went with 15. I think that's good to let them know there was some logic behind it.
Oh, okay.
Even if people don't agree, it came from a logical beginning.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe language just to the extent of to use an extended transition period. So the impact, just say an extended period or,
Yeah. Okay.
Well, you could say an extended period, 16 years or 15 years was chosen by the group based on the amount of time people now pay off an assessment.
Mm-hmm.
If you wanted to say something like to mitigate the impact on recently assessed residents.
Yeah, that's a good line.
And both of those sound good.
I will combine those and come up with something. A couple advantages. So second item, 100% tax advantage. Collects money from most users of the system. We want to keep that. And I think, Kathy, you had a few other advantages, disadvantages.
I think that one is accurate, but I think it applies to both. So we only have it under the one. And both collect from everybody.
No, 100% collects from most because it doesn't collect from anything that's nonprofit. And 50-50 collects from all.
So that's why we put most, I recall.
I see. I thought we were talking residents when I read that.
Okay, so keep it as is.
There were a couple others I don't have it in front of me. There were a couple others in the advantages, disadvantages. I don't remember where it is. It says that it's, legal and used by others, but that also applies to both. And it's only under one of them. And then under the option 1, we say that residents may not like it who have already paid, but that certainly applies to both as well. And then there's one under option 2 that I don't remember how it's worded, but it relates to doing something instead of 15 years, but it is a 15-year plan. Maybe it would be helpful to look at those. I just thought they needed some of them I think should be under both, And I think that one about 15 years, I don't understand it. I'm not sure what the point was there.
Sure. And I took them right from our work session report.
Oh, I'm sure you did.
So that's where they all came from. Maybe we leave that till the end and get through these other items. And if we have time, we could look at those. If not, maybe Kathy, you want to look at them and give me some tweaks to them?
Yeah, I could revise what I'm talking about and send it to everybody.
Let me see if we can get through these other items.
It's kind of a cleanup thing is mostly what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, that's great. Chip, you recommended moving those pie charts, the engagement pie charts to the appendix. I did that. Is everybody comfortable with
Yep.
that?
Hey, Chad.
Go ahead.
Kathy's point about recently assessed properties may not support. I think we have data. I think you can use firmer language than may. I think it's
Yeah.
clear that they don't. Right.
Oh, and that would apply to both.
Yeah.
To both options.
Good point.
Yeah, I think we use May because of get the work we didn't know yet, but that's a good point, Matt, that we can look at those.
We now know.
We now know from the engagement. So good point.
And they were quite clear about it.
Yeah. Subcut chart. So that was in the appendix. So I created 4 appendix B. There was one by unique property ID. So just like a number 0 to 54, because there was 54 projects. Then there was one with a years on the bottom. David prefers the charts by year. There was one by just dollar value and one by percent. Leave them both in there and just do the ones with the years.
I would be inclined to leave them all in there because you never know what piece of information the council wants.
Yeah, they're
Do
just
we?
there. It's not a big deal. It's appendix, right?
Yeah.
The
That's fine.
chart that has the scale at the bottom going from 0 to 60, I think that was, to me, it was very confusing what those numbers represent. And what I gather is that's a chronological layout of the 54 projects that have been done. Is that correct? So that that first one there, if you compare the two charts, you've got a couple in each year, like 2007 there 2, and 2008 there 2, but they were, one of them was done before the other or something, so they, in the chart above that, they are more scattered, and I think they say the same thing in many respects, but I think that the layout of that scale on the first one going from 0 to 60 should be a little clearer as to how those are portrayed, or what the ordering is.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. It's just the taking those years. So the top chart is just the number of 54 projects.
In chronological order.
Yep. And the bottom is just putting them in the year buckets.
But we need to say that 54 projects in chronological order.
Okay.
Hey, Chad.
Yep.
Matt, just out of curiosity, the percentage one, even if you throw out the outliers, it does look like there's a slight upward rise in the percentage of a project that is attributable to subcut. So I'm curious why that might be. With inflation, you'd expect it to kind of remain the same on an apples to apples basis. If you have any, just curious if you have any thought on that.
No.
Did our engineering company put inflation in that study of subcuts?
They took all the dollars and they put it all into 2019 dollars.
Okay.
So inflation is 2% inflation is accounted for those values. But if there's a linear progression, I can't speak to why it's that way.
Has there been any change in engineering and how we look at how the subcut has to be over that period of time, do you think?
No. Been pretty consistent in the 2000s since we started doing the recon.
Okay.
It really, I mean, I can speak to the engineer. Some are willing to take a little bit more risk with the initial projects, but once you get in there, the assessments, you have to do what you have to do. So there's not a big change there. Welcome, Ralph. I saw your email, and hopefully this link, looks like the link wasn't working for you.
Not the first time, but we're here now.
We are just running through comments on the report. So we haven't got to any years yet. So you didn't miss any year specifics. So I'm hearing keep all four and put a note 54 projects by chronological order. For those other charts. There was a question on Appendix C, the actual average assessments compared to inflation. That chart was a request from a council member. Wanted to see what it would look like to take an assessment of the average was 8,000, so I just used 8,000 and then plot that over time with a 2% inflation, and then just see how using a flat inflation rate and how they compare up till 2018-19. So that's what that chart is. It was just Councilmember Stoughton wanted to see that. So I put that in there for him because he requested it. Was Chip wanted to talk, or no, go ahead.
Of course, the big outlier there is lot size, right? That's not going to be accounted for in that chart.
Yeah, strictly assessment per RU. So you'll have a Morningside neighborhood compared to a Gulf Terrace neighborhood.
Okay.
Just don't have that square yards of paving in those numbers.
Well, are subcuts in there too, Chad?
And subcuts are in here. So this is just actual
Yeah, so there's,
actual numbers. Yep.
yeah, so the numbers are all over the place. Or
Yep. So I don't know what the value is, but we can leave it in there. Maybe it needs some more notes.
I think Stoughton wanted to know if there was a huge rise in the cost of doing street projects other than inflation. That is really what he wanted to know. So
Yeah.
if you feel like this answers that for him, then that it would be helpful.
Yep. Taking out the REU differences in the subcut, it feels like it's general inflation is what's causing some increase in cost, but it's not a huge, we're not saying a huge outlier that these costs are double because of something else.
Thank you.
Okay. Either Chip or David brought up the other land uses table that I
So
created.
David, what's your,
Or was it
I don't
Chip?
think that was mine, was it?
There's a
Chip
comment
was
about not seeing that before and just wondering.
Oh, that's in the is that an appendix or in the body?
Appendix K. So I created
Okay.
that table. I'll just go through it from other property classes from 2016 to 18. So we got a church, a public school, a couple city-owned, an apartment, and an office. We put the REUs in there. We looked at what the final street assessment was for those projects. And then we go to the 50% option. That's just going to cut that in half. And then in the text of the report, I put some notes that we've done some of those benefit letters. They generally have met this, the benefit test, even at a full amount. So going to 50%, I don't see concerned. I noted two specific areas in the text that we would have had concern on Lincoln Drive because there was only businesses and commercial properties on one side of the street. So we didn't have the double sided because of 9 Mile Creek is on that one. We would not have been able to meet the benefit test. Then we have an apartment in Melody Lake for this year if it gets approved where there's an issue. So I just wanted to lay it out to the council that generally all these property classes should work, but there's always outliers. And I just gave 2 examples. And if we create this street improvement fund, with the difference in the subcut of that 950,000 we collect every year, that fund could potentially be used for these properties that might not meet that benefit test that are really obvious based on the letters that we do, the letter reports.
by the time if they chose to go to 50-50, would they meet the benefit test? Seems to me you said they did. You thought they would.
Most properties would.
So you're
In the
worried
end.
about the transition period for those properties?
I'm worried about just a few outliers during the transition period,
Okay.
similar to residential ones. There's going to be a few outliers that are going to be on the bubble depending on when we do these neighborhood projects.
Okay.
But I guess my question there, Chad, was like the apartment building. I'm assuming that they get in either of our proposed options that the owners of those apartments would have would get assessed in some fashion, but I'm not sure we've talked about how they would be assessed.
We do it by the square footage. So, or no, apartments is by the number of units. So if there's 20 units, we have a factor that says it's either 0.5 or 0.8. I don't know right offhand, but let's say it's 0.5. So if there's 20 units, then that apartment building would get 10 RUs, and we use the residential single family home number to calculate their total cost.
So we wouldn't, under the way we're looking going forward, is have it be either 50% of taxes based on property value or 100% based on property value. Wouldn't the apartment building then be taxed based on property value?
Yep. So they would see the same change in the policy like a residential home. So they'd only, if we go to 50%, assess 50% of the number.
Okay, so we don't have to create a separate mechanism for those
No,
things.
I'm just saying apply it to these other property classes, the 50% or the 100% options.
Okay.
Any other questions on other land uses? Don, and then Matt. Don first.
Chad, would you really see the city assessment going to 50%? I mean, we're paying for it either way. It's property tax.
On our city-owned lots,
Yeah.
I guess how would I apply a policy? Just say the city's going to pay 100% of an RU. I guess I would apply the same policy, and how we fund it in the backside would be like you currently do with all of our projects, right? So I think for me to apply the policy, and then for finance, you to decide how we pay for that would be a different conversation. That's not part of this work. Does that answer your question?
Well, my point is property taxes is paying for it regardless.
Sure.
Yep, it is now too.
Yeah, it is now. So,
But we always participate in the projects, right? The residents feel like the city should be in this, but yeah, if you technically go all the way down the line, they're paying for it.
all right.
So, yeah.
No, but it always makes the residents feel better that we're counting REUs for parkland and school, and it's just how we do it. So I to stay consistent with what we're doing, at least through the transition, depending on what the end result is.
Yep, creates more REUs, so the actual assessments of the single family homes are lower.
Right.
Yep.
Matt, you had something to say.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute. My computer froze there for a minute. So the question I had, Chad, you brought up using the street fund to somehow handle the outliers. Can you explain what process you would consider for that? And I'm a little confused because I thought we couldn't offer multiple rates for multiple places. Are you talking like someone sues the city, we lose, and then we backfill, or what?
No, that'd be a different thing. So if we go back, the first year, we're going to take out 950,000 for subcuts, right? The tax levy would for both options. So let's say that first year projects, we only have $500,000 of subcut. So now we have a balance of 450,000. Next year, maybe we're under again. The following year, maybe we're way over. But I would anticipate setting that number that we're going to have a balance in that fund, and we just call it the street improvement fund or whatever. So in the text, it says that the task force is directing staff to come up with a way to use that money. And first things are, per the task force report, was street lighting, subcuts, retaining walls, and street lighting. And also put a note in there to keep it flexible, that maybe there's this, like that one apartment I see next year, there's a huge gap between the benefit is like 100,000, but we are proposing an assessment of 200,000. So how do we make up that difference? And that's where I think where my idea was to consider using this fund to maybe address those outliers, such as that one. It would have to be a council action, and we would present it, and they would have to decide whether or not it's appropriate to use it.
But
Or
are
we
we
use it-
basically then taxing them differently? And I thought legally we can't.
It's not the tax portion, it's the applying the assessments. Just
Chad,
assessing them less.
I'm just gonna say that I think that that's really convoluted, and I think people should strongly consider whether that's a good idea. But that's not really my decision to make. I just would hope.
I don't see a difference in the tax. Maybe Don, can you explain it a little differently? But it would just be how do we handle these outliers? And Ralph, I see your hand up. You gotta.
So I guess my perspective is you know, I agree with Matt to a certain degree that it is a convoluted point, but it's something that is yet to be worked. The details are yet to be worked out. With respect to the tax rate, it really doesn't differ in any. It isn't any different than it is today, in that if you would have a property pursue legal action and dispute the assessment, and if they win, the city ends up having to pay for it. What we're doing here is saying, we're proactively saying that they have an opportunity to sue because the benefit isn't there. Therefore, instead of going through that legal process, we're going to preempt that and pay for it proactively.
That's kind of what I was saying, Ralph. Yep. It's those ones that we know we could be challenged and most likely lose, and having the council have that option of using some of these funds to
Well,
meet that difference.
you've got 4 attorneys on the council. They'll look at that.
Hey, Chad, just a comment. So rather than buying down the assessment of an individual property, would you use the fund to reduce the overall project cost so that everybody benefits rather than just the outliers?
Well, and that's another option, right? But just leave it flexible. That's so staff or council could have that. Yeah, that's maybe even a better approach. I just think
Yeah.
about the scale of that versus right now I have one apartment for this number. If we tried to reduce so in my example, we'd have to reduce everybody's assessment by 50%, right?
That'd be a painful
Immediately.
project. We wouldn't have enough money to cover that.
That's what I mean. It would be, in this case, it'd be $2 million right off the get. Right
Didn't
away.
you already
So
pass? Is Melody Lake the one you passed, or is Melody Lake the one they put on hold, but they're still bidding it out?
it's on hold. We're getting more information, which is the bid results, and see how the work of the task force, council retreat, and eventually potential change in the policy.
You may have to put that one on hold for 3 or 4 years.
Maybe, depending how this
So,
works.
Chad, the only thing I'm gonna I actually agree with Don. I think you are also, while you would be avoiding a lawsuit from that participant, you could be creating many more from many different people that are within, in fact, perhaps a class action lawsuit of all the other neighbors in the thing.
Yep, that's
Well,
what
I would agree with that as well. What Matt said.
Well, I can remove that language. That was just in that one section. Remove the language about bridging the gap between the difference in benefits. Okay.
No, I think it should be a discussion with in the work session part with the council when you're working, when you're going through the work session, that, you have this project coming up, and,
Okay.
they need to look ahead at how things like that are going to be handled going forward.
I'll remove the language about bridging gaps in benefits.
And I mean, to that point, I just want to round it out by saying, like, if apartment buildings are regularly seen as a problem, maybe it's evaluating how many REUs are attributed to each unit, and that's fine. That's a property class, right? But if you're going to do this with other homes that are of different values and the same thing, like we were told you couldn't do that. So, I don't feel like
I do like that, Matt. That would be a way to solve what's coming up, as long as,
And apartments have been the easiest to assess over the years. They've been way low the whole time. For whatever reason, this one and the makeup of the REUs within this project just isn't working, right? Can't have every combination figured out. Thanks for that.
Okay, so this Create Street Improvement Fund is an improvement over the slush fund concept, right, Don?
It's different wording, yes.
Can't you put in parentheses and slush fund? I think that is our intent. Does anyone have a problem with that? Other than Don?
Are we making any recommendation in this report as to the size of the first year subcut charge? Or is that something the council's gonna be deciding?
Staff made a recommendation, 950,000. Year one.
Okay. Looking at the report that you sent out and the different subcuts, it seems like that 950 is a number way in excess of most, all, if not all, subcut charges. Maybe there's one or two that would go up to that number. Should it, I mean, is that the intent, to have it be so large that, you know, would cover the 95th percentile or something?
Ralph, I think you want to say something. Ralph?
So, I think, you know, it's not only subcut, but it's also retaining wall, street lighting, and so it's, so you're right, Chip, that it is on the high end of just subcut, but based upon what we've talked about putting in, and obviously it's something that could be lower depending upon how things sort out in the future.
I think one of the goals, however, is that, that must be me, is that we're trying to make sure we cover the really big subcuts and be prepared for that. Like the Hamid's subcut is what?
Yeah, I'd agree. It's both the big ones and these other items that Ralph brought up,
Mhm.
just to cover. And we're going to present to council. They could say, no, we want to do half, and then that would have an impact on that first year tax levy, but it also impact all these other things that we want to potentially fund out of it.
To be clear that that wasn't part of our real recommendation, that number, that it was something to be determined by staff and council.
Okay. Yep. The recommendation was to pull these items out, but the what scale? Okay, I can note that. Chip, long as you're unmuted, how about the comment about equitable by a plurality of households? You had sent that in a recent email.
Me?
Chip.
Oh, Chip.
Well, I was, I was just interested in what people thought. It seems like the one option is acceptable, by a plurality, and the other one is acceptable by a plurality. But they're very differing groups, if you will. I think I mean, I don't know if you look at, we looked at the assessed group and the non-assessed group and what their preferences were. If we look at the whole universe, does a plurality feel that these options are fair and equitable? And is there a pie chart that shows that, Chad?
Well, so I'm hearing you're talking about all forms, and we asked the question, are these options equitable? And 43% agreed in option 1. And for option 2, 43% agreed. So we didn't get a majority for either. I didn't do an equitable pie chart.
Ralph?
Well, I mean, guys, we heard from 300 of the 21,000 residents. That's a half of 1%. So, unless we had over 15,000 responses, there's no way for us to measure or determine a plurality. Plurality, I guess, from my perspective, is, does this group feel that the options that we've presented are the two best options in front of us. And it's something, you know, that the city can move forward with.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to be talking about plurality of a very small percentage, as Ralph just pointed out. I think we communicated as best we could with our residents. We actually got a fairly high response compared to what they normally get. But as Ralph just pointed out, it's still a very small percentage. That's what the council, you know, wants us to do, and they'll hear from more people. But in general, you know, some people don't care, or they don't care until they care, and then usually it's too late.
That's fine. I just thought we should talk about it a little bit, so I'm good.
Yeah.
Okay. And I can say this project was like the highest engagement we've ever seen by residents. So you feel like we need to get more. This was off the charts for how much we typically have people involved in a question like this. So
Kathy, your mute's on. Kathy, unmute yourself. Kathy,
you're muted.
you're muted.
She's got two screens up.
Oh, can't hear you.
We'll give her a second here and then. Should be right on the bottom of the screen, Kathy, finding it.
Kathy, you've got two screens open. There you go. Now unmute.
Okay, well, we'll keep going, and when Kathy unmutes herself, we will go back to what Kathy has to say.
Okay. Next
So,
one
Chad,
is, yeah,
what else do we have on your list?
cumulative tax impacts. And Ralph, I am going to apologize. I did not understand what you were trying to get across until like yesterday. So we just never look at cumulative. We never present it to council that. We always do the incremental by year. So the totals that I have is that incremental total over years. Now I understand you want to have $4 plus $4. So year two, it's $8 and then another 4. And then it's going to get close to the numbers that you presented. So it's 600. Now I can do those numbers. So the question for the group is that a benefit to people to have that in the tables?
So the real point is, and I guess it's just really just a thumbs up or thumbs down. To me, if I'm a homeowner, I want to know how much this is going to cost me over the 15 years. I don't want to know about the $4 the first year, the $8 the second year. How much is it going to cost me over those 15 years? And what's the difference between option one and option two? And what's incredibly revealing, in my opinion, is that the total difference between those two options is roughly $660 between option one and option two if you strip out the subcut. And from my perspective, that's a relatively small dollar amount for a very significant difference philosophically between the two options.
I have no problem adding cumulative to it. I will tell you that from a council perspective, we've never looked at that on anything, but maybe that would be a good piece of information. The other thing is, let's also remember, is this is based on the median house range. So that cumulative amount at that point, you know, where there isn't a huge difference, if you take it to the $2 million house, it'll be different. So are we just going to keep it at, I'm fine adding cumulative to it as another piece of information. Does anyone think that we're still okay just including this one level of home?
I would think we can go all over the board with different home values. I think sticking with the median value is the best, and people can extrapolate from their own situation. But I think the table in here shows the annual tax hit, but it says it's cumulative.
Yep.
And so we need, if we want to keep this, then don't call it cumulative, but you can add another column to this that says cumulative over the transition period.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I'll add that in there. It sounds like the group is willing just to add it, and I was just understanding what Ralph was trying to get across.
So Chad and Don, I have a question to you too. So if you get into this work session and they said, okay, so this is a house, what is the house? $550,000 house? Will you be prepared to tell them what happens to a $1 million house and a $2 million house?
Yes.
Is that a calculation that you can come up with for them fairly easily if that's a piece of information they need?
Yep, I can do it for the task force right now.
No, I was more concerned that we always give our council, everything in advance that they might need. And I do know that that might be a question.
Yep, sounds like we can provide that if the council asks. So maybe to keep the report. I mean, typically we present all the median value stuff when we do budget stuff, so that is the
Right.
number. So be consistent with what staff always presents year over year to that.
Mhm.
Hey, Don.
No,
Yep.
Is it just like a straight multiple? So like if your home was twice the median value, is it double or no?
mm-mm.
No, because of the tax capacity change, that home's valued over 500,000. So as a home, the number just gets larger as home value increases.
Okay, I got it. I think we got a couple more here, a few more to go. So do we want to pull subcut out and have a different line in these tables?
I'm one of those that doesn't understand why we would pull subcut out because it is part of the both cumulative and the tax burden that we are putting on people. So I guess I don't understand why we would pull subcut out. Ralph?
So it's basically, we're looking at several decisions. One, the council expressed interest that they wanted to move forward with subcuts. So here's the impact of that decision. The next decision they have before them is to either stay the course or change to option 1 and 2. And so from my perspective, it's important to show that in a decision tree type fashion that here's the impact of decision number 1, subcut, and here's the impact of the next decision, whether you choose option 1 or option 2.
I don't think we were offering them the option of just removing subcut because we don't believe that takes care of the state 420, is it 429?
Yep, we
So
felt just subcut wasn't
where in
enough.
our report are we saying you can remove the subcut and you might be okay?
I don't think we say that.
David?
I didn't have a comment.
Oh, no, I was asking how you felt about it, actually. As opposed to not having a comment.
No, I don't. I think the way that you articulated it was right, Ann, and for me, I don't see the benefit of adding more complexity to that. I think it's fine the way it is.
Chip or Matt, any opinion?
No, I would agree. I mean, I understand what Ralph's getting, and I think that's a valid point, but I think it's more confusing by trying to strip it out, and we can just show the subcut as as a component of the taxes.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, what's your next one, Chad?
Okay, good. I'll put the cumulative in there. We won't remove the subcut. So the The last one from Ralph was the tax city comparison list. So I had put that in the appendix. Does the group think that should be up in the main text? So it would be a snippet of that flyer. It shows the impacts or the other, comparing the other cities' tax amounts on a $400,000 house, and then potentially adding in some of these options to that. So well, comments on that. Maybe Ralph wants to clarify for the group that job.
So the key point there, and what I shared, and Deb sorted out in my email, was that even if you take the worst case scenario and add in the year 15 full change in the policy, it barely moves the needle on where Edina sits compared to other cities. And I know that as we've moved through the task force process here, time and time again, there's been a concern expressed as to, well, how will the council feel on where we sit with respect to other properties? And so nowhere in our report do we show where we would end up. And I think that it's important that we speak to that issue. And that was the intent of what I shared.
David.
Yeah, I do like to see that information in the report. My 2 cents is that it can go in the appendix, just because if you look at our objectives as a team, it didn't have anything about controlling property taxes within the surrounding community. So it's great information, but I don't think it needs to be part of the narrative in the report. It can go in the appendix.
Chip, Matt, Kathy's nodding her head yes. Chip's thumbs up. Matt, you okay with that in the appendix?
Yeah, I mean, I concur. I would say, generally speaking, and I'm not a council member, right? But if you incorporate 100% of the transportation in there and you hit a bad budget patch, you're going to have a whole bunch of different decisions to make if you're not funding it at all with assessments. Is transportation something you're theoretically never going to get rid of, or it would have to trade off with other things? So it just makes it a little bit more complicated.
Okay, do we want to add the full change to that flyer, or make another copy and paste and see if we add in $40, Edina would still be at number 2 on the list, or we just let council figure out those numbers?
I would be inclined to let council do that if they're worried about it. I actually don't think that, I think they know they have to make a change. I think they're not going to worry about where that puts them against other cities. They might be interested in how other cities pay for these things in, more than they're going to be.
And I think another thing I just thought of, this is only a portion of their budget stuff, right? They're going to have to make decisions on all of it. And that's when they would look at maybe these comparisons.
Right. I mean, this doing something is going to affect budgeting in the future. I mean, it just is, but whether they have to build a huge new water treatment plant because the plume from St. Louis Park is worse, or, I mean, there's some huge budget things that can come up, Don.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I have not had a request from a council member for this comparison. This is just something we send out to the residents as a matter of course, but that's it.
Okay. A couple other things. So Kathy caught that I had 2 conclusions to the report. One was the one she drafted, and one was, I think, what I originally drafted. So anybody got comments on which one they want to use?
I don't remember them right now.
Don? I'm sorry, but one quick clarification on that city property tax chart where it says $400,000 homes.
Yep.
Because we're higher value, is that why it's low? I mean, I just want to make sure that we're talking apples to apples here, based on the fact that I just learned that there's quite a bit of variability in terms of tax rate.
So hopefully I'm answering your question. If not, correct me. So we pick 400 so that we can compare to other cities because our median value is so high. There are very few cities that can approach that. So we're trying to make an apples to apples comparison of a house in Edina. Like you said, because our property values are so high though, it does kind of skew things a bit. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I mean, I was just trying to figure out if that's even accurate, and it sounds like it could be something that's a sales pitch that the city uses rather than true apples to apples comparison.
Well, the numbers are accurate because it's just based on tax capacity and tax rates in the individual cities. But take Hopkins, for instance, the majority of the properties up there are valued at 400 or less. So they're carrying more of the burden than a $400,000 house in Edina would.
That answers my question. Essentially, it's skewed because there are many more high value properties in Edina. So
Correct.
it's not truly apples to apples. It makes you look like a bright shining star in comparison to Hopkins, but it's not necessarily accurate, right?
Yeah, maybe something that would be more accurate is what is the median value in each of these cities paying taxes? But again, because the median value is so low in these other communities, I don't know if we could ever have a apples to apples comparison.
I'm not asking you to. I'm just trying to express the limitations of the chart that we're looking at.
Okay, Kathy, I keep muting you because you're the feedback. So maybe raise your hand when you want to speak, or getting back to that conclusion paragraph. I think
Kathy, did
I
you
would
want
use
to speak
Kathy's.
now? Okay, can you
ahead.
unmute Kathy?
I don't know what happened. Yeah. It's such an echo. I tried to leave the meeting and come back, but that didn't work.
Because you have two computers.
You'd have to turn the volume way down on the one that you're listening to us and then speak.
I'm on one computer.
Try
Okay,
that.
now try. Talk. You can talk, Kathy. Oh, now you're off again. I don't know what you're doing. Okay, let's keep going because we're running out of time.
So I would suggest using Kathy's conclusion. It was
Okay.
wordsmith, and I'll use that.
Okay,
Kathy
we'll
had a
use
question.
Kathy's.
Yep, about table 3 in appendix J, and we've talked about those cumulative. So that's that big table where I tried to show the different options, right? So 1B and C is 6 years, and then 11 years, and then comparing it to 15 for both 16 for both the options. So I will update that table to include the cumulatives like we talked about. But that's what that table is. Kathy is showing the different impacts based on those different timeframes that the group talked about at the last meeting to include just for council in the appendix. So I'll leave those in there and update the tables.
Chad, can I ask you about Appendix F, that PCI table?
Oh yeah.
My question was, this looks like it was done with an actual status in 2016 and then projected thereafter. Can we show where we're at today? And
Yep. I updated that last week or whatever, maybe between the versions. So I have the number up to 2020. Our number is 72. The green line keeps going. It went 68, 72, 73, and dipped down in 1 point from 19 to 20. So I did. Yep, updated that.
so the green line is the actual that
Yep.
projected without budget increase. Do we need that? I mean,
We
is
don't.
that
We could
that's
take
kind
that
of
off.
distracting if that's not relevant.
We'll take it off. It was just a chart we made when we had conversations with the council back in 2015.
It's when we
So-
upped the money so that we could keep doing things in between reconstruction that kept the streets going for 50 years. So
I will remove that note. Thanks for that. Just looking through my notes now. Kathy will help me with the advantages, disadvantages. Other than that, I think. And then there was, Ralph provided a lot of text to the report. I really made it clear and concise. So you can see I highlighted in yellow that version 3, the executive summary. I thought it made it right to the point. So look at that. I'll send out a new version. And there's one other section, one other note that Ralph added in his comments, and I just want to make sure the group that I hadn't heard before. So the REU assessment method is unfair in that it assumes all properties within a neighborhood reconstruction project benefit equally, and that properties outside of the project have no benefit. So that was something I hadn't heard from the group. Just want to verify if that was the feelings of the group before we added that note.
So that's how you look at it if you have an issue between 100% taxes and 50, right? I mean, why would we even look at changing REUs now when we changed them years ago so that we could treat, do you want every house to be an REU in the city? I don't really understand, Ralph, what the point of going after REUs is right now.
Well, the point is, it's one of the things that we've determined to be unfair in how the current system works. In that, we said that it is one, it's not a wear and tear. Residential vehicle traffic is not a wear and tear issue on the street. Number two, that you've got large lots versus small lots, and they're all being charged the same. And so REUs is just fundamentally an unfair way to allocate that process, both within the neighborhood and then outside the neighborhood, because you've got other people driving on it, which is a comment that any number of people made in Better Together.
Okay.
Maybe I can leave it in there for my next version. I'll make all these edits. I'll highlight that. Maybe for me, I need to read it and see it for me to really understand. Maybe there's members of the group that would like to just see that written out.
Okay, yeah, I'm actually opposed to going after REUs right now. I don't see any point in that. It's how we base doing our cities. I did a huge study in the early 2000s when I was on the council, changing from running feet to REUs, which ultimately seemed to make people much happier when we went to that. So for me, I guess I'm married to REUs, but I have a different reason for being that, Ralph, than you do.
And maybe others already have a comment right now. It's up to the group.
Ralph, are you, or is it well, I don't know as we're saying so much it's the REUs as it is the 100% neighborhood assessment is unfair. And maybe it's just I don't know if the REU terminology is a problem. But the current methodology is unfair and that it assumes all proper, for that, what Ralph says there. It's I'm not sure if it's REU or running feet or if that matters. It's just the current assessment policy.
Anybody else?
My understanding of REUs, it's because generally speaking, households generate the same number of trips. So that's why it's an equivalent unit. I mean, and I don't know what correlation there is. I'm just going to posit something. I mean, some of these larger lots where they'd subdivide stuff off. I mean, the only other way I guess you could do it is you could try to use lot size as a total of the lot size in the area. So if you have a larger lot, perhaps you have a more expensive house, but I don't know that that's a guarantee either. So I'm probably more comfortable with just leaving it at REUs.
David, you had your hand up. Nope, you're muted. Unmute yourself. Thanks.
Thank you. I don't remember any conversations where we determined as a group that REUs were lacking in some way. I remember we described them, but I don't remember any debate on whether we should try a different method. I don't agree with that characterization of it. I'd like to, if we want to make a recommendation on REUs, we're going to have a lot more conversations than we have.
Anybody else? So as for you, Ralph, is using the word REU just because you're talking about a fairness in one small neighborhood having to pay for all their streets versus the city as a whole paying because everybody drives on them? Is that really more what you're at?
So there are really two issues, and that's the first one, correct, is that it's RUs and allocating costs based on RUs only within the project ignores the use by that street by any number of people outside the neighborhood. Number one, which was commented again in the feedback from the community. And number two, as we've seen and you know, and as has been shared within the task force, that you've got a very wide range of lot sizes and in some cases within a project. And, you know, is that fair with respect to allocating on an REU basis? I mean, to me, it isn't that I'm looking to throw out, I mean, the use of REUs, if you use option one, it's really more of this, from my perspective, another reason why you would choose option two.
So under the fairness part of option two, do I hear you saying that you think that the feedback we got on Better Together tells us that people are more interested in the city paying for it because everybody drives on the streets in a simplified form? You know, I would be willing to add that under option two as something that we did get from Better Together. Anybody else have a problem with that? David?
No, just to pile on, I would say I agree with you, and you can make that claim and support that claim without bringing RUs into the picture.
Okay.
Can you
And
state that
Kathy
again,
is-
Ann?
I'll
Or
type it to
something?
you.
Okay, I missed it.
Yeah.
Okay, let me know.
Brain fade, and I haven't had COVID.
So 2 minutes left. Got a couple of scheduled things. So shooting for March 2nd council meeting. So I need the report done by February 23rd. That gives us 2 weeks from today. We could finalize the report over email or get together next Tuesday again to run through the report. So looking for feedback from the group on that. Potential another meeting or not.
Any feedback on another meeting? Are you all okay with Chad sending out the revisions, and then if there's a huge problem or something, we can schedule a meeting, but it sounds like maybe we don't have to? But yes,
Okay, I see a couple thumbs up.
okay.
We'll work through email, and if we need to, we can try to schedule something, but I mean, we're
So
real
the
close. I got
March-
through these. Yep, go ahead.
March 2nd council meeting starts at 7. And,
Yep.
and if they have public hearings, we would be after the public hearing, so it could potentially be late at night.
I'll get a better idea once we get closer to the meeting. We'll invite everybody. You know, I would see this being at least a half-hour discussion with the council, maybe 45 minutes. We could potentially ask to present during special recognitions if we see a very large development public hearing or something. So I'll track that agenda, and we'll just have to see how
Okay.
it fits in there. But shooting for well, we have to be on the 2nd because they start their council retreat stuff just a few days later.
Okay. Well, it is noon. I would say we should stand adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
I'll get a draft out.
Okay, I'll send you that line that I gave you.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.